Support for this podcast is brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. We take a closer look at our human experiences and use stories to explore culture, history, and contemporary issues. You can find us on thinkwhy.org.
Sometimes I talk about what we do as kinetic diplomacy. The idea that if you're dancing, you're probably not harming another human being.
Hello, I'm Emmy DeGrappa. This is What's Your Why? Each week we bring you stories asking our guests the question why. We learn about their passion, why they do what they do, why should we care, and what can we learn? What better place to explore the human landscape than from the state known for its incredible landscapes, Wyoming? And what better organization than Wyoming Humanities? Serving our state for over 45 years, we share stories, ideas, and wisdom about the human experience. Welcome to What's Your Why? And today, we are talking to David Dorfman. David has a deep desire to get the whole world dancing. He is a Guggenheim Fellow, a 4-time National Endowment for the Arts recipient, and he is internationally known. Welcome, David.
Thank you very much, Emmy. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you for being here, and I also want to add that you are the artistic director for David Dorfman Dance.
Yes, our dance company is nearly 30 years old, and it's been one of the giant joys of my life to direct this company and to see it change and to have wonderful dancer collaborators in all areas, in music, in visual design, in philosophy, to help me with the mission, which, among other things, is to get the whole world dancing. Sometimes I talk about what we do as kinetic diplomacy. The idea that if you're dancing, you're probably not harming another human being. If you're dancing, you're probably touching and caring, being empathic, and devising a system where you can do something in peace as opposed to conflict.
When did you start dancing? Were you a young dancer?
I have a great memory of pulling on my mom's apron strings when I was about 8 years old. And I was convinced that I would start a dance school one day, and I knew the outfits would be white shirts and black pants. I'd been watching June Taylor dancers, Peter Gennaro, watched a lot of Lawrence Welk growing up in suburban Chicago, but I didn't really get dancing in an organized fashion literally till college. I took one ballroom dance class, and then in college I became a disco dancer, competitive disco dancer, and I took my first more modern dance class. And in that class were a bunch of theater majors, and they were hilarious, they were risky, they did anything, they were having fun, and I was sold. I continued with a business degree in undergraduate, but I knew from that moment, and around when I was 19, that I really wanted to dance. And then when I was 23, I came east from the Midwest and got an MFA, a Master's in Fine Arts and Dance, from Connecticut College, not so ironically, the place that I am now teaching. I've been there for 12 years as permanent faculty.
And how did you go into modern dance?
The bridge from disco dancing went more towards jazz. One of my first jobs at Giordano Jazz Dance in Evanston, Illinois, was teaching senior citizens disco dance. And then when I got more exposed to modern dance, it had an athleticism. I'd been a competitive athlete. I was a catcher from when I was 8 till I was 20. I played even as a freshman in college. And so the notion of a groundedness that was really inherent to modern dance, and basically a theory of anything goes. I liked that. I took ballet classes, but I wasn't very adept at it. I continued to study it, but it seemed that modern dance and postmodern and forms like contact improvisation, which is almost like an athletic sport form, those were the places where I could excel. And so I was drawn to modern dance in that way. And I could combine the athleticism, a certain storyline, and my love of music at the same time, because I played music when I was a kid as well.
Tell us about your dance philosophy and your desire to get the whole world dancing.
Well, whenever our dancers are on stage, we're people. So instead of it being about lines in space, which I also love, it's always about what we're expressing as the people who we are. Now, sometimes we take on exaggerated characters, even stereotypes. I was talking about a dance earlier today done to Sly and the Family Stone music. It's called Prophets of Funk. And it's very, very enjoyable, almost seems like a song cycle. And then we get into the issues of the day that are very, very relevant today with the racial strife that we're experiencing, but also that are very prescient as Sly was thinking about these things in the late 60s, 70s. So I love to take on character, much of which is based on who we actually are. We many times call each other by name in our dances, but it's all about people, how people relate to one another, the great things we do, the way we form community, and the bad things we do to each other, and how there can be a glimmer, if not a flood, of hope about doing things in a more generous, kind, intimate, empathic manner. That's my goal, is to affect an audience. You were talking about think radio. I want the audience to think and feel and experience and hopefully leave the theater transformed and with a bit of a resolve to see the world in a different way.
What is the intersection that you aspire to in your art form, the intersection of art and humanities, the discussion that takes place after the dance or
Well,
during the dance?
I think that's a great, great point. I mean, I always say that our form of art, our movement-based dance theater, it begins the conversation. It doesn't have absolutes. It doesn't solve anything, but it hopefully begins conversations that happen right in the theater, perhaps during the show, right after, perhaps in a question and answer, perhaps in the car on the subway afterwards, and perhaps on social media or emails after. And the pieces, the movies, the live performances that have affected me most are the ones that stick in my head, in my soul. So that is my intent. It's rarefied time that we get to be on stage. Our pieces are usually an hour long, and we work so hard, and we hope that the audience comes in. One of my mottos is invite and indict. So I want to embrace and to hold, but I also want to challenge ourselves and the audience that come. Like, how can we make the world better? So conversation is key. And humanities, it's all around us. It's expansive. Humanities think and feel about issues that have this historical base but are changing by the second. So, for example, I have a really dear friend named David Kuman Kim at Connecticut College. He's a professor of religious studies, but also American studies, and a philosopher, really. And he's just organized with his friend at UPenn, John Jackson, this forum called Love-Driven Politics. And he has helped me for the last decade on dances that I've made. So he will come in and he'll give some movement feedback. He's not a mover necessarily, but he will go at it from a philosophic viewpoint, from a humanitarian, from a humanities, from religious studies, and it's things that I wouldn't have thought of. And so I love to involve as many different disciplines in the dances that we make. I always feel like we're writing with our dancing. A lot of the people that have been attracted to our company and currently are in it are either writers or visual artists, as well as athletes. So I feel that it's all interconnected. Humanities, arts, they're commingling all the time.
Oh, I definitely agree. And it's interesting that you're making basically social statements and using dance to do that. So, how do you decide what statements you want to be performed on stage?
Well, I have a little method. It works for me, I think, anyways, and that is to mine my own person for whatever is the hottest topic for me. So, coming back again, came from a need for me to evaluate the messes that I've made and to not leave a giant mess for our son and for the rest of the world. And so it's almost like a recycling project, but almost like an emotional and physical. So things and ideas. What is the mess that you've created? What is the mess that's kind of proper in a lovely way to leave behind? And then what are the messes we've created that we really need to clean up? We really need to be responsible for them. So that's something that's special for me. And so then I bring it to our group, our creative team, our dancers who are collaborators, and I say, okay, what's in this for you? Let's do a writing assignment. Let's do a physical improv assignment. What is it about mess that we can all unite on and then go in grossly divergent paths and represent a number of ideas that at their core have this notion of mess. So that's one thing. Years ago, we did a piece called Underground. It was loosely based on the Weather Underground, an activist group from the 70s, and we wanted to see what the notion of activism in 2003 or 4 is when I began the project. It premiered in 2006. And since that time, activism has really been on the rise, but there was this dormancy that I was observing, and I felt that I wanted to investigate it. But it also came from a personal moment that I remember watching, ironically, the Democratic National Convention in 1968 from my parents' house and seeing all the violence and all the arguments and this democracy almost unraveling. But I was 13-year-old and I was watching it on TV. I wasn't throwing rocks and in the streets protesting. So I wanted to go back. I love looking at history and seeing how it's relevant today. So I find something that's personally attractive to me, and then I see how it can relate to the collaborators I'm working with, and ultimately, the most important thing, the audience today.
As you were talking, I was thinking about using that word, the messiness, or how we make messes.
Yep.
And the thing that rose to my mind in that instant was immigration, and how it's just this tangled mess that we can't seem to unravel.
One of the many messes that we as Americans and the world cannot unravel. And the new work that we've had the great privilege to investigate here while we've been at Denser's workshop is called Around Town. And we have images on a very personal level of a wall going up. But in this case, it's a wall in an apartment with decorations and photos on it because it's a monologue about romantic strife. But the wall imagery is also purposeful for a wall that divides. We talk about a love divided. There are many images that are transient. They're people on the move. We haven't used the word refugee because we don't want to bring every single media image to mind, but we are mining the images of today, which is really, really, really new. People have migrated for centuries, for all of time. But right now, I think it's on some level taking the whole world by surprise. No one really knows how to deal with immigration on many, many different levels. And the idea of another person in front of you that you don't know, they may look different, they may talk differently, they may have a different language or skin color, their food they eat, their smell, whatever is different, that I think is going to be the biggest challenge of the next 20 years, is an empathic response to difference. And so that's one thing that's really on our mind. So we've called it Around Town, like we're this little village of like people and of unlike people. And how does this village relate to other villages? And I think it's really, really important. So that's on my mind a lot.
Oh, that's very interesting. And you grew up in Chicago.
I did.
And now you live in New York.
Yeah, well, I live in New London, Connecticut with my family, my wife and 15-year-old who are coming back again this piece. We lived in New York for 20 years. A couple years after Sam was born, we just wanted a little more space around us, and our dance company is company in residence, so they come up about a month of the year. We also do a summer session, and then I go to New York frequently and work with them there. But we're actually happy to be out of New York, to have a little breath and grass and water. We live a block from the Thames River that goes into the Long Island Sound, and we actually really, really love that. We see water every day on our way to work, and it's very rejuvenating.
And that's why I love Wyoming.
Oh my gosh, it's so beautiful here. We don't want to leave. We've been treated like the most special guests in the world, and the generosity that has flowed our way is really remarkable. And we're flattered and honored to be in your community.
Well, we're honored to have you here, and thank you for talking to me today.
You're so welcome, Emmy.
Thank you for listening. I'm Emmy DeGrappa. This Think Why podcast is brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. We use the humanities as a lens to explore the human experience. You can find us online at thinkwhy.org.